Something moves in the American sky that defies all explanation. For decades, credible witnesses from pilots to police officers have reported encounters with objects that perform impossible maneuvers. We are counting down 33 of the most absurd UFO sightings ever documented across the United States. By the end of this journey, you will hear the full, incredible stories that have left government officials and scientists utterly baffled. You will learn about a famous couple who experienced missing time on a lonely road and a massive object that brought a bustling airport to a standstill. What does it take for you to believe in the truly unexplainable? Our journey begins in the humid heat of July 1952. For 2 consecutive weekends, the skies above Washington, D.C. became a stage for the inexplicable. Air traffic controllers at Washington National Airport saw them first, blips of light moving at impossible speeds across their radar scopes. These were not stray weather balloons or misidentified aircraft. The objects traveled from stationary hover to sudden bursts of velocity that defied the known limits of physics. Soon, pilots in the air began radioing in, confirming the visual sightings. They reported glowing orange orbs that danced and weaved with an intelligence that sent a chill through the entire air traffic control network. The situation escalated rapidly, moving from curious anomaly to a full-blown crisis unfolding directly over the most protected airspace in the nation. Panic rippled through the highest levels of government. The White House was put on alert, with military jets scrambled to intercept the unknown intruders. Imagine the scene: fighter pilots armed and ready, vectored towards targets that would then vanish or streak away, outmaneuvering them with ease. It was a direct, undeniable challenge to national security, happening in plain sight for the world to see. The public pressure grew so intense that the Air Force was forced to hold one of the largest press conferences since the end of the Second World War. Their official explanation that the entire event was merely a temperature inversion, a trick of the weather causing radar to bounce off layers of warm air, was met with immediate and widespread skepticism. How could a weather phenomenon be tracked by multiple ground radars and simultaneously witnessed by experienced pilots visually? The Washington D.C. flap remains a cornerstone of UFO lore, not just for the credibility of the witnesses, but for the sheer absurdity of the official response. It was a moment that forced a nation to look up and wonder what or who was bold enough to invade its capital not once but twice. Just a few years later, a different kind of encounter unfolded on the lonely roads of West Texas. It was a calm November night in 1957 near the small town of Levelland. The first call to the local sheriff came from a terrified motorist. He claimed his car engine had suddenly died and his headlights had flickered out, all while a massive, glowing, egg-shaped object descended onto the road ahead. The object was described as being about 200 feet long, radiating a brilliant, blinding light. As it landed, the entire electrical system of his vehicle simply shut down. Sheriff Weir Clem, likely thinking it was a prank or a case of nerves, took the report with some skepticism, but then a second call came in, then a third. Over the next few hours, multiple independent drivers on different roads surrounding Levelland reported the exact same phenomenon. Their stories were all consistent and utterly chilling. A colossal, luminous craft would approach, and as it drew near, their engines would sputter and die. Their headlights would dim and then go dark entirely. Once the object lifted away into the sky, their vehicles would start right back up as if nothing had ever happened. The sheer number of separate witnesses, all reporting identical electromagnetic effects on their cars, ruled out any possibility of a hoax or mass hallucination. The United States Air Force sent an investigator who quickly concluded the witnesses had simply been spooked by ball lightning or an electrical storm. This explanation, however, fell completely flat. There was no storm that night, and ball lightning does not shut off car engines or consistently appear as a 200-foot-long, structured craft to multiple people across a wide area. The Leveland case stands as one of the most compelling because of its physical, measurable effects. These were not just lights in the sky. This was something that interacted with our technology in a way we still cannot fully explain, disabling machines with a silent, invisible force on a dark Texas night. But the skies were not the only place these encounters occurred. The next chapter in American UFO lore would be written not by radar operators or pilots, but by an ordinary couple on a late-night drive. In September of 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were returning to their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire from a brief vacation in Canada. It was a clear, star-filled night as they traveled along a deserted stretch of highway through the White Mountains. Betty noticed a bright light that seemed to be pacing their car, a star that moved. Pointing it out to Barney, they initially dismissed it as a planet or a satellite, but the light grew larger and closer, soon revealing a strange, structured craft with a row of windows along its side. Barney, a man not prone to fantasy, stopped the car and got out, raising his binoculars for a better look. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Through the windows, he could see several figures in shiny, black uniforms staring back at him. In a sheer panic, he raced back to the car, shouting at Betty that they were going to be captured, and sped off down the road. This is where the story takes its most bizarre turn. They soon heard a series of strange, rhythmic beeping sounds that seemed to come from the trunk of their car. Then a period of missing time descended upon them. They arrived home hours later than they should have, feeling disoriented and deeply unsettled. Their watches had stopped, and the trunk of their car had odd, polished circles on it. The psychological distress became so overwhelming that they eventually sought help, leading them to undergo regressive hypnosis. Under hypnosis, they independently recalled the same terrifying missing hours. They described being taken aboard the craft by non-human entities, beings with large, wraparound eyes and grayish skin. They were subjected to a physical examination, a cold, clinical procedure that felt both intrusive and terrifying. The Betty and Barney Hill case became a cultural touchstone, the first widely publicized account of an alien abduction. It established a narrative template: the craft, the missing time, the medical examination by the Greys, that would be echoed in thousands of reports in the decades to follow. Their story forced a new and deeply personal question into the public consciousness. What if these objects were not just observing from a distance, but were sometimes coming much, much closer? The quiet forests of Arizona became the stage for an encounter that would push the boundaries of belief even further. In November of 1975, a crew of 7 forestry workers were driving home through the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest after a long day of clearing brush. The evening was calm until a strange, glowing object appeared in a clearing ahead. It was a luminous, disc-shaped craft hovering silently just above the treetops. One of the men, a young logger named Travis Walton, impulsively jumped out of the truck and ran towards the light. His co-workers watched in horror as a brilliant beam, like a bolt of blue-green energy, shot out from the craft and struck Travis, throwing his body backward through the air. Terrified and convinced their friend had been killed, the driver sped away in a panic. When they gathered their courage and returned minutes later, both Travis and the craft were gone. This was not a solitary sighting. 6 other men witnessed the entire event, and their stories matched perfectly. They immediately reported Travis Walton as missing, sparking a massive 5-day manhunt involving local sheriffs, volunteers, and tracking dogs. Suspicion quickly fell on the crew, with authorities theorizing they had fabricated the story to cover up a murder. Then, just as suddenly as he vanished, Travis Walton reappeared. He was found disoriented and dehydrated, stumbling near a gas station on the outskirts of town. His story was beyond anything anyone could have imagined. He claimed to have awoken inside the craft, surrounded by short, humanoid beings with large, haunting eyes. He described a sterile, otherworldly environment before being taken to another room where he encountered more human-like figures who placed a transparent mask over his face, causing him to lose consciousness. He next remembered being dumped by the roadside. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Walton and his crew voluntarily underwent polygraph tests to prove their honesty. The results were staggering. 6 of the 7 men, including Walton himself, passed their tests, with the examiner concluding they were telling the truth about the core event. While skeptics would attack the investigation's methods, the sheer weight of multiple, credible witnesses and the physical evidence of a missing man made the Travis Walton case a modern legend. It was a story that forced a simple, terrifying question. What if someone who vanished actually came back to tell us what happened? 5 years after Travis Walton's ordeal, the skies over Arizona staged another spectacle that would become one of the most witnessed UFO events in history. On a clear March evening in 1997, a formation of lights described as vast and silent drifted slowly across the state. This was not a fleeting flash or a distant blur. Witnesses from the border town of Paulden all the way to the edges of Phoenix saw a gigantic V-shaped object, a solid, dark structure connecting the lights, moving with an impossible, silent grace. The scale was staggering, an entity so large it blocked out the stars as it passed overhead. Thousands of people, from police officers and pilots to ordinary families standing in their backyards, watched in awe. They reported it made no sound, a city block worth of machinery gliding through the air without a whisper of engine noise or the roar of jet propulsion. The event was so profound that even the state's governor, Fife Symington, initially mocked the reports before later confessing he too had witnessed the enormous, otherworldly craft. The official response came days later. The military claimed the entire event was a series of flares dropped during a training exercise by the Maryland Air National Guard. They presented video evidence of flares burning out as they descended, a convincing explanation for a portion of the light seen later that night. But for the thousands who saw the initial massive V formation, the explanation felt like a dismissal. Flares do not fly in a perfect, structured V. Flares do not move together as a single, silent entity. Flares do not appear as a solid, triangular craft blocking the heavens. The disconnect between the public's first-hand experience and the official account created a deep and lasting skepticism. The Phoenix Lights endure not merely because of the number of witnesses, but because of the fundamental clash between what people knew they saw and what they were told they saw. It was a collective moment of awe that turned into a lasting question about what truths are floating above us, just beyond the reach of a simple explanation. While the deserts and cities of America held their secrets, one of the most meticulously documented encounters unfolded under the cold, damp skies of England. For 3 consecutive nights in December of 1980, strange events transpired in Rendlesham Forest, a sprawling woodland nestled between 2 crucial military bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, both operated by the United States Air Force. This was not a civilian sighting. The witnesses were highly trained American security personnel, men entrusted with guarding some of the most sensitive nuclear assets in Europe. The incident began just after midnight when patrolmen reported strange, multicolored lights descending into the forest. Thinking it might be a downed aircraft, Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt authorized a team to investigate. What they found defied any conventional explanation. Airman First Class John Burroughs and Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston were among the first responders. They pushed deep into the woods, their path illuminated by an unearthly glow. They broke through a final line of trees and froze. Sitting in a small clearing was a triangular craft about 9 feet wide, seemingly made of a smooth, black, glass-like material. It was covered in symbols that resembled ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, a language of curves and lines etched into its surface. the air was charged with static electricity. In an act of incredible courage, Penniston reached out and touched the warm, seamless hull. As he did, he mentally recorded the strange symbols, later sketching them in his notebook. The craft then began to rise, maneuvering silently through the trees before shooting away at an impossible speed. The following night, the lights returned. This time, Lieutenant Colonel Holt led a team himself, armed with a tape recorder. His running audio commentary, a real-time account from a senior officer, is a chilling piece of evidence. He describes the objects beaming lights down to the ground, moving erratically and performing maneuvers that defied the laws of physics. At one point, a brilliant red, pulsing light shot over the forest and appeared to drop a glowing substance. Radiation readings taken at the landing site later showed levels significantly higher than the normal background. The Rendlesham Forest incident stands apart because of the unimpeachable credibility of the military witnesses and the physical traces they left behind. These were not farmers or hikers. They were United States Air Force personnel, sworn to protect national security, who found themselves confronting a technology so advanced it rendered their own weapons and training utterly useless. Their first-hand accounts, the sketches of alien symbols, and the official audio tape create a dossier of evidence that is almost impossible to dismiss. It forces us to wonder what kind of intelligence would choose to land next to a nuclear-armed base, leaving its mark for the very soldiers guarding the perimeter to see. Yet, even with the military's official documentation, the truth seemed to remain just out of reach. The American public was about to capture its own evidence. One hot August night in 1951, in the skies above Lubbock, Texas, a remarkable event unfolded. It began with a group of 4 college professors, men of science, sitting in a backyard when they saw something that defied their academic training. A vast semicircular formation of soft, glowing lights, perhaps 30 in total, swept silently and majestically overhead. This was not a random flash. Over the next several weeks, multiple groups of independent, credible witnesses, including engineers and pilots, reported seeing the same mysterious lights, sometimes in a V-shape, other times in a perfect, arcing crescent. The descriptions were consistent: a silent, fast-moving fleet of unidentified objects. Then came the proof that would catapult the Lubbock lights into national headlines. A young college student named Carl Hart Jr. was lying in his bed when he saw the formation pass by his window. He grabbed his camera, rushed outside, and managed to snap 5 clear, startling photographs. The images showed a distinct, V-shaped array of luminous points against the dark Texas sky. Here was tangible evidence captured on film for all to see. The United States Air Force's Project Blue Book investigated the phenomenon and eventually settled on an official explanation. They claimed the lights were merely plovers, a type of bird with white chests, reflecting the glow of the city's new streetlights as they flew in formation. For many, this explanation felt deeply unsatisfying. Could flocks of birds really account for the immense, structured formations described by so many experienced observers? Would birds fly in such a perfectly geometric pattern, and could they reflect enough light to be seen so clearly and consistently from the ground? The Lubbock Lights case presented a unique dilemma: a collision between credible eyewitness accounts, physical photographs, and an official conclusion that seemed to ignore the sheer scale and strangeness of what so many people swore they saw. It was a moment that asked a difficult question: what happens when the evidence you have in your hand is simply not enough to convince the powers that be? A different kind of encounter was waiting in the snowy woods of Pennsylvania. On a cold December afternoon in 1965, a fireball streaked across the skies of multiple states, witnessed by thousands. But this was no ordinary meteor. In the small town of Kecksburg, residents watched as something not just burned up in the atmosphere, but appeared to steer itself, crashing directly into a nearby forest. Dozens of locals rushed to the site, expecting to find aircraft wreckage. What they discovered was far stranger. There, nestled in the trees, was a large metallic object shaped almost exactly like a giant acorn. Witnesses described it as being about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, bronze in color and covered in strange hieroglyphic-like markings that ran around its base. The object seemed to have been deliberately designed, a crafted artifact, not a random piece of space debris. The response was swift and decisive. Within an hour, the area was sealed off not by local police but by the United States military. Soldiers and officials in unmarked vehicles cordoned off the entire woods, turning away the very residents who had first reported the crash. Witnesses were intimidated and told to forget what they had seen. Later that night, many reported seeing a large tarp-covered object being carefully loaded onto a flatbed truck and hauled away from the site under heavy guard. The official explanation, issued after a puzzling delay, was that the object was nothing more than a Soviet satellite that had re-entered the atmosphere. Yet this explanation created more questions than it answered. Why the extreme military secrecy for a piece of foreign space junk? Why the immediate cordon and the reported intimidation of civilians? For decades, the case remained a simmering controversy. In a stunning turn of events, NASA was sued in the 2000s to force the release of its documents on the Kecksburg incident. The space agency eventually claimed its records from that day had been lost. The official story of a Soviet satellite has been repeatedly challenged by researchers and journalists who point to inconsistencies in the trajectory and the object's described appearance. The Kecksburg incident stands as a powerful testament to the idea that when something truly unknown falls to Earth, the response is not to investigate openly, but to remove all evidence from public view, leaving only questions and a lasting impression of a giant, silent acorn covered in unreadable writing, taken away in the dark of night. The cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic hold one of the most official and baffling chapters in this entire mystery. In October of 1967, off the coast of the tiny fishing village of Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, something fell from the sky that would prompt a government to openly admit it was chasing the unknown. It began on a clear night with multiple witnesses, including local fishermen and Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers, watching a large aircraft much bigger than any conventional plane fly low over the water. It was marked by a row of 4 brilliant amber lights, and it was clearly in distress, dipping and weaving erratically before it struck the surface of the ocean with a tremendous roar and a flash of light. The witnesses all agreed this was not a meteor or a misidentified airplane. This was a controlled craft that had crashed. The response was immediate and official. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police logged the report not as a UFO, but as an aircraft accident. A full-scale search and rescue operation was launched, with local fishing boats and later Canadian military vessels rushing to the presumed crash site. They expected to find floating debris, fuel slicks, and survivors. Instead, they found only a wide, swirling patch of bubbling, yellowish foam that stretched across the water. There was no wreckage, there were no bodies. The object, whatever it was, had vanished beneath the waves. The official report from the Mounties remains a stunning document. It concludes that a flying object of unknown origin crashed into Shag Harbor and that no conventional aircraft was missing. The military search continued for days, dragging the seafloor with grappling hooks, but they found absolutely nothing. The case took an even stranger turn days later, when the Royal Canadian Navy was reportedly called in to investigate a second, submerged object that was tracked moving silently under the water, traveling away from the crash site at a high rate of speed. The Shag Harbor incident stands as a rare instance where the authorities did not dismiss the witnesses, but instead corroborated their story with an official investigation that ended in a complete dead end. It presents a chilling possibility that some of these objects do not just traverse our skies, but our oceans as well, using the deep, dark water as a perfect hiding place after a very public failure. The deep waters of Shag Harbor proved some objects preferred the sea, but a Texas highway would soon reveal one that seemed to be powered by fire itself. On a cold December night in 1980, Betty Cash-Landrum and her 7-year-old grandson Colby were driving home through the dense pine forest near Dayton, Texas. It was a routine trip until a massive, diamond-shaped object descended directly over the road ahead. This was no silent, hovering light. The craft was immense, spewing flames from its underside in rhythmic, thunderous bursts, like a rocket struggling to stay aloft. The roar was deafening, and an intense, blinding white light poured from its surface, forcing the trio to shield their eyes. As they brought their car to a stop, the heat became unbearable, searing the inside of the vehicle. Terrified, they watched as a fleet of large, double-rotor military helicopters, which they identified as CH-47 Chinooks, suddenly appeared and seemed to be escorting or pursuing the colossal, fiery diamond. The object eventually moved away, and the helicopters followed it into the distance, leaving the 3 witnesses in a state of shock. The immediate aftermath was a living nightmare. Within hours, all 3 became violently ill. They developed severe headaches, nausea, and debilitating weakness. Their skin, where it had been exposed to the object's intense light, began to redden and swell, soon blistering into what looked and felt like severe radiation burns. Betty Cash's symptoms were the most acute. She lost patches of her hair, her eyes became swollen shut, and she developed large, painful lesions all over her body. Her condition was so grave she was hospitalized for weeks, treated for what her doctors could only describe as acute radiation sickness. This was the crucial, terrifying distinction of the Cash-Landrum incident. This was not a mere visual sighting. It left behind physical, measurable harm on human beings. Determined to find answers and receive help with their mounting medical bills, the 3 victims hired a lawyer and sued the United States government for damages. Their case was a landmark event, the first and only time American citizens took the government to court over injuries sustained from an unidentified flying object. They believed they had witnessed a secret, experimental military aircraft, perhaps a nuclear-powered vehicle that had malfunctioned. The legal battle was long and arduous. The government, however, flatly denied possessing any such craft or having any helicopters in the area that night. With no official entity willing to claim responsibility for the diamond-shaped object or its deadly effects, the case was eventually dismissed. The official silence left the victims without recourse or explanation, their lives permanently scarred by an encounter with a technology that seemed to be both impossibly advanced and dangerously unstable. Their suffering posed a haunting question that went beyond mere curiosity. What if the greatest danger from these objects is not their mystery, but their very presence, a power so immense that a mere glimpse of it can leave you burned and broken? The sky above Kentucky held a different kind of danger, one that would claim a life in the line of duty. On a clear January afternoon in 1948, the control tower at Godman Army Airfield received frantic calls. A colossal, circular object, metallic and immense, was hovering motionless in the sky. It was described as being several hundred feet in diameter, a silent, shimmering disk that defied any known aircraft. Captain Thomas Mantell, a decorated World War II pilot with the Kentucky Air National Guard, was leading a flight of 4 F-51 Mustangs on a routine training mission. The tower urgently requested he and his squadron investigate. Mantell, a serious and experienced aviator, agreed and broke from his formation, climbing his piston-engine fighter towards the unknown. His radio transmissions, crackling with static, painted a picture of escalating confusion and determination. He first reported the object as metallic and tremendous in size. He continued his ascent, pushing his plane beyond its safe operating limits in the thin air, striving to close the distance. His final, chilling transmission stated he was closing in to take a better look. Those were his last words. Captain Mantell's plane crashed in a field, scattering wreckage across the countryside. He was killed instantly. The official Air Force investigation concluded that the brave pilot had simply chased a skyhook balloon, a high-altitude research balloon, and had blacked out from a lack of oxygen before his fatal crash. For the public and for many investigators, this explanation felt hollow. Why would a seasoned combat pilot, a man familiar with the sight of balloons, risk his life and his aircraft to pursue something so mundane? Witnesses on the ground described the object as a structured craft, not a drifting balloon. It was reported as being stationary, then moving, a behavior inconsistent with a passive weather instrument. The tragic death of Captain Thomas Mantell became a sobering milestone. It was the first fatality officially linked to the pursuit of a UFO, a stark reminder that the mystery in the skies was not just a subject for curiosity, but a potential peril for those who dared to approach it. But not all encounters involved fiery objects or silent triangles. Sometimes the evidence was left behind on the ground for anyone to see. In the dusty solitude of New Mexico, just outside the town of Socorro, a police officer's routine chase led to one of the most physically documented cases in history. It was April 24, 1964. Officer Lonnie Zamora was in pursuit of a speeding car when he heard a loud roar and saw a flame in the sky descending into a remote arroyo. Thinking a local dynamite shack might have exploded, he abandoned the chase and carefully drove his patrol car across the rough terrain to investigate. What he found was not an explosion but a landed craft. Sitting in a gully was a shiny, white, egg-shaped object supported by two thin metal legs. Standing near it were two small figures in what looked like white coveralls. They seemed startled by his arrival and quickly vanished. As Zamora radioed for backup, the object let out another deafening roar. A blue and orange flame shot from its base as it rose smoothly into the air, flying silently away over the nearby mountains. When other officers arrived, they found tangible proof that something extraordinary had occurred. On the ground were 4 distinct indentations where the craft's legs had stood. The brush beneath where the object had hovered was charred and smoldering, clear evidence of an intense heat source. The investigation was swift and thorough. Officers from the Army, the FBI, and the United States Air Force's Project Blue Book all descended on the site. They took soil samples, measured the impressions, and interviewed Zamora repeatedly. He was known as a solid, reliable officer with no history of fabrication. The official Project Blue Book file, while unable to identify the object, concluded that Zamora was sincere and that the physical evidence was real. They found no conventional explanation for what had landed in that arroyo. The Socorro case stands as a rare example where the proof was not just in a credible witness testimony, but in the very earth itself. It was a moment that left behind a ghostly signature, burned brush and landing gear marks in the dirt. A silent testament to a visitor that came, was seen, and then simply vanished back into the vast New Mexico sky. While the deserts and cities held their strange visitors, a different kind of terror descended upon a rural Kentucky farmhouse, an encounter so prolonged and bizarre it feels like a scene from a fever dream. In August of 1955, the Sutton family and their guests at the Kelly Hopkinsville farm were settling in for a quiet evening when one of the children ran inside, screaming that a strange, glowing object had just landed in a nearby gully. The adults, armed and skeptical, went to investigate. At first, they saw nothing, but when they returned to the house, the real nightmare began. Peering in from the darkness outside the windows were small, silvery creatures, no more than 3 feet tall, with oversized, glowing yellow eyes and long, thin arms that dangled almost to the ground. The family, terrified, did what any rural family would do. They grabbed their guns. What followed was a night-long siege. The men fired repeatedly at the creatures, the sound of shotgun blasts echoing through the quiet night. They claimed their bullets would hit the beings with a metallic ping, simply ricocheting off their silvery skin and having no effect whatsoever. The creatures responded not with aggression, but with a kind of eerie, acrobatic curiosity. They would float up to peer into the windows, somersault backward off the roof, and perform clumsy, hand-over-hand flips along the porch railing, their large, unblinking eyes always watching. The family, barricaded inside, took turns shooting through the door and windows whenever one of the beings approached, a desperate battle that lasted for hours. When their ammunition began to run low and their nerves were completely shattered, the entire group made a frantic, panicked escape, piling into their cars and speeding to the local police station. The authorities, confronted with a group of genuinely hysterical people, had no choice but to take them seriously. A squad of police officers and state troopers returned to the farmhouse, expecting to find evidence of a hoax or perhaps a gang of prowlers. Instead, they found something far more puzzling. The house was riddled with bullet holes both inside and out, confirming the family's story of a prolonged firefight. They found no trace of the silvery beings, but they did find other strange signs, including an odd, luminous patch in the area where the object was said to have landed. The official investigation yielded no conventional explanation. There were no reports of escaped monkeys or costumed pranksters. The police left baffled, and the story of the Little Silver Men of Kelly Hopkinsville became a classic of UFO lore, not for a single flash in the sky, but for the sheer, sustained absurdity of a gunfight against seemingly indestructible, tumbling creatures that seemed more interested in watching than in causing any direct harm. The quiet fields of Exeter, New Hampshire, became a stage for a terrifyingly intimate encounter in September of 1965. It began with 18-year-old Norman Muscarlo hitchhiking home late at night along a dark, rural road. A massive, silent object suddenly rose from behind a line of trees, a dark shape outlined by a row of 5 brilliant, pulsating red lights. It moved toward him, gliding so low it seemed to skim the treetops. Terrified, Norman threw himself into a shallow ditch, watching as the enormous craft hovered directly above him, so close he could feel its silent, oppressive presence. The moment it drifted away, he ran to the nearest house and called the police. Patrolman Eugene Bertrand was the first to respond, and he took the shaken teenager seriously, because just an hour earlier he himself had stopped to assist another motorist who had been frightened off the road by an identical, silent object with flashing red lights. Bertrand drove Norman back to the field where the encounter occurred. At first, the night was quiet. Then the animals began to panic. Horses in a nearby corral started kicking and screaming in their stalls, and the dogs in the neighborhood barked frantically. Suddenly, the thing returned. It rose from behind the trees, a colossal, dark craft without wings or a tail, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Its row of red lights began to pulse in a rhythmic, hypnotic pattern, flooding the entire field with an unearthly crimson glow. Officer Bertrand drew his service revolver before thinking better of it. A second police car arrived, driven by Officer David Hunt, who witnessed the same incredible spectacle. The 3 men stood together, 2 seasoned police officers and a credible teenager, all watching this silent behemoth hang in the air, illuminating the landscape with its otherworldly light before it shot away at an impossible speed. The United States Air Force conducted a brief investigation and settled on an explanation that would become frustratingly familiar. They attributed the entire event to a Project Mogul balloon, a high-altitude research device used to detect Soviet nuclear tests. For the witnesses, this explanation was an insult to their intelligence and their experience. This was no drifting balloon. It was a structured craft under intelligent control that reacted to their presence and caused tangible panic in the local wildlife. The sheer credibility of the police officers, men trained to observe and report, made the Exeter incident one of the most compelling cases on record. It forced a simple, powerful question into the public discourse. When multiple reliable witnesses see the same impossible thing, who do you believe, them or an official file that simply closes the book? Yet the skies were not the only place these objects chose to land. Deep in the wilderness of Manitoba, Canada, an amateur geologist named Stephen Michalak set out for a quiet day of prospecting near Falcon Lake in May of 1967. He was scanning the rocky terrain for quartz and silver when a flock of agitated geese suddenly scattered from a nearby marsh. Looking up, he saw two brilliant, glowing cigar-shaped objects descending from the sky. One of them landed on a flat rock outcrop just 50 feet away from him, while the other simply hovered nearby before shooting off and vanishing. The landed craft was a flawless, oval-shaped vessel about 40 feet across with a rough, metallic surface that resembled brushed stainless steel. A brilliant purple light emanated from a seam around its middle, and a humming sound filled the air along with a smell like burning electrical circuits. Incredibly, Michalak heard voices from inside the craft. He assumed it was a secret American experimental vehicle, and in a mix of curiosity and concern, he called out in both English and his native Polish, asking if the occupants needed help. A door slid open on the side of the craft, revealing an intensely bright, swirling light inside. He could see several shadowy figures moving within, and he heard what sounded like a struggle. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut. The craft then rotated, and a panel of small, grid-like vents opened on its side. A blast of searing hot gas shot out from one of these vents, striking Michalak directly in the chest and setting his shirt on fire. The force of the blast threw him backward, and as he tore his burning clothes from his body, the craft lifted off the ground and disappeared. The immediate physical evidence was horrifying. His chest was marked with a perfect grid-like pattern of burns, matching the vents he had seen on the craft. He was violently ill, suffering from nausea, headaches, and debilitating weakness. When he finally staggered back to civilization and reported his experience, authorities were baffled. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated and found the landing site, where the rock was scorched and several small, radioactive patches were detected. Michalak was hospitalized for weeks, his symptoms persisting and defying easy diagnosis. Despite the clear physical traces, the official explanation was that he had likely suffered a hallucination or a hoax, even though he had no motive and had sustained genuine, serious injuries. The Falcon Lake case stands as one of the most disturbing because it left its mark not just on the landscape, but on a man's body, a permanent, painful reminder of a close encounter that was as physically harmful as it was utterly inexplicable. A different kind of evidence emerged from the warm, coastal air of Florida. In the quiet, affluent community of Gulf Breeze, a series of events unfolded between 1987 and 1988 that would divide the UFO community for decades. It began with a local building contractor named Ed Walters, who claimed he was not just seeing strange lights, but was being targeted by a singular, structured craft. His proof was a collection of photographs, some of the clearest images of a UFO ever presented to the public. The pictures showed a distinct saucer-shaped object, gray and featureless, often with a prominent, dark rectangular window or panel on its underside. These were not blurry dots in the distance. They were crisp, close-up shots that seemed to show a tangible machine hovering over houses and palm trees. The local newspaper, the Gulf Breeze Sentinel, took a huge risk and published the photos, triggering an immediate and intense media firestorm. Reporters and television crews descended on the small town, and soon dozens of other residents came forward with their own accounts of seeing a similar silent craft. It was a full-blown flap centered around one man and his remarkable pictures. Skepticism, however, followed just as quickly. Critics pointed out inconsistencies in the photographs and Walter's stories. The controversy reached a fever pitch years later after Walters had sold his home and moved away. The new owner made a startling claim while renovating the attic. He reported finding a crude model of a UFO, a saucer made of paper plates, styrofoam, and fishing line hidden in the ceiling. For the skeptics, this was the smoking gun, definitive proof that the entire affair was an elaborate hoax. Yet, the story refuses to die so simply. Many investigators and local witnesses maintain that while Walters may have fabricated some of his evidence, he could not have fabricated the dozens of independent sightings from other upstanding citizens in Gulf Breeze. They argue that at least some of the encounters were genuine, and that Walters perhaps saw an opportunity to insert himself into a real phenomenon. The Gulf Breeze saga remains a deeply conflicted chapter, a cautionary tale about the perils of both blind belief and outright dismissal, leaving us to wonder where the line falls between a clever deception and a truth that is simply too strange to be captured cleanly on film. 4 highly trained military men found their aircraft commandeered by an invisible force. It was a crisp October night in 1973, and an Army Reserve UH-1 Huey helicopter was on a routine training flight over Ohio. The crew, led by Captain Lawrence Coyne, was cruising at a steady altitude when one of his men pointed out a single red light on the eastern horizon. It seemed distant and harmless at first, perhaps a satellite or a small aircraft, but then it began to close in on them, and fast. The light was attached to a solid, gray, cigar-shaped object, and it was on a direct collision course. Captain Coyne immediately took evasive action, shoving the control stick forward to force the helicopter into a steep 500-foot-per-minute descent. It was a desperate maneuver to get out of the path of the oncoming craft. The object, however, did not simply pass by. It performed an impossible feat of aerial agility, slowing its own headlong rush to a perfect, silent hover directly above their cockpit. For a few heart-stopping seconds, the massive, silent form blocked out the stars. Then, a brilliant green shaft of light emanated from the object, flooding the helicopter's interior. The entire cabin was illuminated in an unearthly emerald glow. The crew braced for impact, but there was no collision, only a strange and profound sensation of being lifted. Without any input from the pilots, without the roar of the engine changing its pitch, the heavy helicopter began to climb. It was being hauled upward against its own power and weight, ascending 1,000 feet in a matter of seconds before the green light vanished and the object shot off to the west. The crew sat in stunned silence, their instruments confirming the impossible climb. All 4 men, including a hardened crew chief and a medic, independently corroborated the entire event. They had not only seen the craft, they had felt its power as it took physical control of their aircraft, demonstrating a technology that could manipulate gravity itself. This was not a distant light in the sky. It was an up-close demonstration of a power that could, if it wished, have simply plucked them from the air. Above the ancient deserts of Iran, a different kind of phantom was tracked on military radar. In the early morning hours of September 19, 1976, the control tower at Mehrabad Airport in Tehran received a flood of calls from civilians reporting a massive, multi-colored object hanging motionless in the night sky. The object was so brilliant it outshone the stars, shifting between blue, green, red, and orange. This was no civilian curiosity. It was a direct incursion into sensitive airspace. An Imperial Iranian Air Force F-4 Phantom jet, one of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world at the time, was immediately scrambled to investigate. The highly skilled pilot, Lieutenant Jafari, locked onto the object with his radar and closed in, but as he approached, his entire instrument panel went dark. His communications system crackled and died, leaving him in a silent, powerless cockpit, hurtling through the night. The moment he broke away and put distance between himself and the object, all his systems miraculously came back online. He tried again and again, each attempt resulting in the same complete electronic failure whenever he got too close. It was as if the object was surrounded by an invisible bubble that neutralized any technology that dared to challenge it. Frustrated and running low on fuel, Lieutenant Jafari received authorization for a more direct approach. He locked his weapons system onto the brilliant, shifting light and prepared to fire an AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. The moment his finger touched the trigger, his entire weapons panel went dead. The missile would not launch. The object had not just disabled his communications, it had disarmed him completely. Then the situation escalated from bizarre to terrifying. A second, smaller object detached itself from the primary craft. This new object, described as a brilliant star-like light, shot directly toward the F-4 at an incredible speed. Lieutenant Jafari thought it was a missile. He prepared to eject, certain he was about to be destroyed. But at the last possible second, the smaller object simply changed course, arced around his cockpit, and shot back to rejoin the main craft, which then shot upward and vanished. The entire event was meticulously documented in a United States Defense Intelligence Agency report, which concluded the object demonstrated a technology far beyond any known earthly capability. The Tehran incident stands as a perfect military-grade case, a controlled experiment that demonstrated an object could not only outmaneuver a top-tier fighter jet, but could render it utterly helpless with a silent, invisible force. The skies over Belgium became a stage for a nationwide mystery. For over a year, beginning in late 1989, a wave of sightings swept across the country, involving not just casual observers but thousands of credible witnesses, including police officers and military personnel. The reports were remarkably consistent, describing a massive triangular craft. It was silent, moved slowly, and was marked by 3 bright white lights at its corners with a single, pulsing red light at its center. This was not a fleeting glimpse. The object was seen hovering low over residential areas, its sheer size and utter silence creating a sense of profound awe and unease. The climax of the wave occurred on the night of March 30, 1990. 2 separate NATO radar stations picked up an unidentified target. The object was performing maneuvers that defied physics, dropping thousands of feet in a matter of seconds. In response, the Belgian Air Force scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets. This was a full-scale military interception. The jets locked onto the object multiple times with their sophisticated radar systems. Each time, the craft reacted with impossible speed, breaking the lock and accelerating away before the pilots could get a visual. The ground radar and the jet radar were in agreement, tracking something solid and intelligently controlled. The official government report, released after a lengthy investigation, made a stunning admission. They concluded that a total of 3,500 people had witnessed the triangular craft and that the phenomena remained unidentified. No known aircraft, no secret military project, no weather anomaly could account for what an entire nation saw and its air force pursued. Here was a modern, democratic government openly stating that something unknown had flown with impunity through its sovereign airspace, outmaneuvering its best technology and leaving behind only a single haunting question. What do you do when the mystery is not just witnessed by a few, but confirmed by the many and officially acknowledged as real? The dark skies over Alabama became a witness to a new kind of encounter, one that blurred the line between aircraft and apparition. It was July 24, 1948, and Eastern Airlines pilots Clarence Chiles and John Whitted were at the controls of a DC-3 passenger plane. The night was clear, the flight routine, until something impossible streaked into view. A craft with no wings shot toward them at a terrifying speed, its shape unmistakably that of a torpedo or a cigar. It was a solid, metallic object, and as it flashed past their starboard side, they saw a row of bright, square windows glowing with an intense yellow light. Along its length, a deep blue glow pulsed, and from its tail erupted a 50-foot-long trail of fiery, red-orange exhaust. The entire encounter lasted only seconds, a silent, screaming pass that rocked their aircraft before the object pulled up into the clouds and vanished. Both pilots, seasoned professionals, were certain they had nearly collided with a craft of unknown origin. Their credibility was beyond question, but the story did not rest on their word alone. On the ground, a military guard at Robins Air Force Base in Georgia reported seeing an intensely bright, fast-moving object streak across the sky at the exact same time. His independent testimony gave the pilot's account a powerful, corroborating anchor. The United States Air Force investigated the incident, initially suggesting the pilots had misidentified a meteor. But Chiles and Whitted stood firm. They knew what they had seen. Meteors do not have rows of illuminated windows. Meteors do not exhibit controlled flight, pulling up into a climb to avoid a collision. The Chiles-Whitted sighting became a landmark case, not for its duration, but for its clarity and the unimpeachable character of the witnesses. It forced a reluctant military to confront the possibility that some of these objects were not just balls of light, but structured vehicles, piloted craft that shared our airspace with a terrifying, silent confidence. The Cold War skies over England became a proving ground for a technology that defied all logic. In August of 1956, a series of events unfolded between two crucial Royal Air Force bases, Lakenheath and Bentwaters, that would be documented in official reports as one of the most perplexing radar visual cases in history. It began late at night when ground radar operators at Bentwaters tracked a single unknown object moving at an astonishing speed, well over 4,000 miles per hour. This was not a fleeting blip, it was a solid return behaving with clear, intelligent purpose. Then the situation escalated. Radar operators at the Lakenheath base, over 30 miles away, confirmed they were also tracking the same phenomenon. The object performed maneuvers that were simply impossible for any known aircraft of the era. It could stop dead in mid-air, change direction instantaneously, and accelerate to hypersonic velocities without any visible means of propulsion. The consistency between the two separate radar stations eliminated any possibility of an equipment malfunction. This was a real, physical object in their airspace. In response, an RAF Venom night fighter was scrambled to intercept the intruder. The pilot, a trained and skilled aviator, was vectored towards the target by the Lakenheath radar controllers. He soon acquired the object on his own airborne radar and reported a bright, blinding light ahead. He closed in, but the encounter did not go as planned. In a stunning display of aerial dominance, the unknown object did not flee. Instead, it calmly and deliberately maneuvered itself behind the pursuing fighter jet. The ground radar operators watched in disbelief as their screens showed the UFO execute a perfect, tight circle around the much slower Venom, taking up a locked position on its tail. The pilot radioed back, his voice a mix of confusion and alarm, stating that the object had gotten behind him and was now mirroring his every move. He could not shake it, he could not outrun it. After a few moments of this terrifying aerial dance, the object simply vanished from both the ground and airborne radar. The official report filed with the United States Air Force concluded that the incident remained unexplained. This was not a case of misidentification, it was a calculated demonstration of superior capability. The object had not just been seen, it had been tracked on multiple radars, visually confirmed by a pilot, and then it had outflown a military interceptor with an ease that seemed almost playful. It left behind a room full of stunned professionals, their technology rendered useless, their training made obsolete by a silent intelligence that had chosen to teach them a lesson in the art of flight. Even the most hardened skeptic would have been shaken by what unfolded in a public park in Voronezh, Soviet Union, in the autumn of 1989. It began like a scene from a science fiction novel, with a large, glowing, pinkish ball descending from the sky and landing in a wooded area frequented by children. But this was no fantasy. Dozens of young witnesses, their stories corroborating each other with chilling consistency, reported seeing a hatch open on the side of the craft. From it emerged a being unlike anything ever described before, a giant at least 10 feet tall with 3 glowing eyes and dressed in silver overalls or a coat of metallic scales. Alongside this terrifying figure was a smaller, boxy robot that moved with a jerky, mechanical gait. The children watched, frozen in a mix of terror and wonder, as the trio-eyed giant and its mechanical companion walked near the landed sphere. Some of the braver boys even claimed the giant looked directly at them, its central eye glowing, causing one of them to momentarily vanish from sight before reappearing moments later, paralyzed with fear. The sheer number of child witnesses all telling the same core story made the case impossible to ignore. When Soviet authorities arrived, they found something even more compelling than testimony. There, in the soft earth of the park, were clear, deep imprints. One set were large, rounded depressions consistent with a landing gear of immense weight. The other set were two long, parallel grooves, as if left by the trudging feet of the robot. This was physical evidence, tangible proof that something very heavy and very strange had settled in that park. The story might have remained a local curiosity, but then something unprecedented happened. The official Soviet news agency, TASS, which was the mouthpiece of the state, released a detailed report on the incident to the international press. This single act transformed the Voronezh landing from a wild rumor into a global sensation. For a government known for its secrecy and suppression of such topics to openly acknowledge a UFO event, complete with alien giants and robots, was a staggering development. It forced the world to confront a bizarre new possibility, that these encounters were not confined to the isolated roads of America or the forests of England, but were happening openly in city parks, witnessed by the most honest observers of all, children. The Voronezh case stands as a monument to the absurd, a story so strange that its credibility hinges on the physical traces in the mud and the official seal of a superpower that decided, for once, not to hide the truth. The sheer number of witnesses in Voronezh made denial difficult, but a similar event on the other side of the world proved that even hundreds of credible accounts could be silenced. On a crisp autumn morning in April 1966, in the Melbourne suburb of Westall, over 200 students and teachers from two separate schools were enjoying their morning recess when the sky became a theater for the impossible. A silent, silver-gray craft, shaped like a classic saucer with a slight dome on top, descended from the clear blue sky. It glided over the school grounds, hovered low for several moments near a stand of pine trees, and then shot away at an incredible speed, vanishing in an instant. This was not a distant, ambiguous light. It was a structured object seen in perfect detail by a massive group of children and the adults entrusted with their education. The reaction was immediate and electric. A science teacher, spurred by curiosity and a sense of duty, organized a group of older students to rush towards the area where the object seemed to have landed. They fanned out across the grassy reserve, searching for any trace, any evidence of what they had all just seen, but they found nothing. The field was empty, the pine trees offering no clue. Then the strangeness deepened. Soon after the sighting, unidentified men in dark suits arrived at the school. They were not local police. They gathered the witnesses, especially the teachers, and spoke to them in stern, intimidating tones. The message was clear and unsettling. They were told not to talk about what they had seen, to forget the entire event. The official explanation, when it finally came, was flimsy and dismissive, suggesting the students had been fooled by a weather balloon or an experimental aircraft, an explanation that failed to account for the craft's described maneuvers and the sheer number of observers. For decades, the Westall incident was a suppressed local legend, a shared secret among those who were there. The official silence and the chilling effect of that witness intimidation worked for a long time, burying one of the most significant mass sightings in history. The lasting impact on those students and teachers, however, was profound. They grew up knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied simple explanation, yet they carried the weight of that truth in a culture that refused to acknowledge it. Their collective experience stands as a stark reminder that sometimes the most compelling evidence is not just what is seen, but the concerted effort to make sure it is never seen again. Far out in the South Atlantic, a Brazilian Navy ship became an unwitting witness to a technological marvel. In January of 1958, the Almirante Saldanha was anchored near the volcanic shores of Trindade Island, serving as a support vessel for a scientific expedition. The day was clear, the sea calm, and the crew was busy with their duties when a lookout suddenly raised the alarm. a strange, silent object was approaching the island at a fantastic speed. It was not an aircraft, not a bird, but a distinct, structured craft that many witnesses described as being shaped like a giant Saturn, complete with a thick ring or equatorial bulge encircling its center. It moved with an impossible, wobbling motion, darting and hovering near the peak of the island's volcanic cone before vanishing into the clouds. The ship's photographer, Olmero Barona, was summoned. He managed to scramble onto the deck with his camera, his hands likely shaking with a mix of urgency and disbelief. As the object reappeared, he snapped 4 rapid succession photographs. He captured it clearly, a stark, dark shape against the bright sky, its bizarre form unmistakable. The film was developed right there on the ship, under the strict supervision of the vessel's captain, eliminating any chance of tampering. The resulting images were stunningly clear, showing the Saturn-shaped object in crisp detail. What happened next was unprecedented. The Brazilian Ministry of the Navy itself officially endorsed the photographs and the testimony of the entire crew. A signed statement from the ship's commander and multiple other officers, all highly trained military men, corroborated the sighting. The Navy had officially logged a UFO encounter. The photographs were splashed across the front pages of newspapers, causing a public sensation. The official response from American investigators, however, was swift and dismissive. They suggested the whole event was a hoax, that the object was a model suspended by a thread or cleverly double exposed onto the film. These explanations crumbled under scrutiny. The witnesses were numerous and their accounts were consistent. The object had been seen by men on the ship and also by a separate group of geologists on the island itself, all before Barona even took his pictures. Analysis of the original negatives showed no signs of fakery. How could a hoax have been orchestrated on a tightly controlled military vessel in the middle of the ocean, with the object witnessed independently by so many? The Trinidad Island case stands as a rare example where the proof was not just in the testimony, but in the cold, hard reality of a photograph officially authenticated by a national navy. It presents a haunting question. When the evidence is clear and the witnesses are beyond reproach, what does it mean when the official story still refuses to accept what is plainly visible in the frame? The testimony of children is often dismissed as fantasy, but what happens when dozens of them independently report the exact same terrifying vision? In September of 1994, at the Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, 62 children between the ages of 5 and 12 were enjoying their morning recess when their ordinary world vanished. A silver craft described as a saucer or a disc descended from the sky and landed in a patch of brush just beyond the school's playground. The object was silent, and from it emerged one or more strange beings. The children's accounts, gathered separately by teachers and later by investigators, were chillingly consistent. They described the figures as thin and long-limbed, with large, black, wraparound eyes and skin that seemed almost to glow. One being was seen hovering just above the ground, while others moved with a strange, gliding motion. The creatures did not speak, but several children reported receiving a telepathic message, a dire warning about the direction of humanity and the destruction of our planet's environment. The event lasted only minutes before the craft shot upward and disappeared, but the psychological impact was permanent. Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack traveled to Zimbabwe to interview the children. He found them not as giggling storytellers, but as genuinely traumatized witnesses. They were shaken, some crying, many too frightened to return to the playground. Their drawings, made independently, all depicted the same sleek, silver craft and the same haunting, large-eyed beings. Dr. Mack, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, concluded that these children were not lying, nor were they suffering from a mass hallucination. They were describing a real event that had profoundly disturbed them. The sheer number of witnesses, their separate but identical stories, and the visible, lasting trauma made the Ariel School case one of the most compelling and unsettling encounters on record. It forces a deeply uncomfortable question. If this was not real, what could possibly create such a unified and terrifying fantasy in the minds of 62 separate children, leaving them with a shared fear and a warning for the world? Even a bustling international airport was not immune to the inexplicable. On a cold, overcast afternoon in November 2006, at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, a group of United Airlines employees looked up from their duties and saw the impossible. A dark gray, metallic, saucer-shaped object was hanging motionless in the sky directly over Gate C-17. It was not an airplane, not a helicopter, not a weather balloon. It was a silent, structured craft, estimated to be about the size of a small bus, and it defied the very logic of the busy tarmac below. For several minutes, it simply hovered there, a stark, silent anomaly against the thick cloud cover, witnessed by a dozen credible employees including pilots, mechanics, and ramp workers. Then, without a sound, it shot straight upward at an unbelievable speed. It pierced the solid, overcast sky so violently that it left behind a perfect, clear blue hole in the clouds, a circular window to the heavens above. The hole then swirled shut several minutes later, as if the sky itself was healing from the puncture. The witnesses, seasoned aviation professionals, were stunned. They knew the difference between a conventional aircraft and something that operated outside all known principles of physics. The initial response from the Federal Aviation Administration was swift and dismissive. They claimed the witnesses had simply seen a weather phenomenon, a whole punch cloud, and that there was no credible evidence to support the sighting of an actual craft. This explanation, however, ignored the fundamental sequence of events described by every witness. They saw the solid, silent object first, and then watched as its departure created the hole. A weather event does not create a structured, metallic saucer. The subsequent media attention forced a more thorough investigation, but the official conclusion remained the same, unidentified. How could so many trained eyes at one of the world's busiest airports all misinterpret a simple cloud formation? The O'Hare incident stands as a modern classic of absurdity, not for its rarity but for its location. It was a brazen daylight display over a major transportation hub, witnessed by experts, and yet the official record simply shrugged, leaving behind only the ghost of a perfect hole in the clouds and a lingering question about what we are willing to see, even when it is right in front of us. A different kind of mass sighting unfolded over the quiet farmlands of Stephenville, Texas. For several nights in January 2008, dozens of ordinary citizens witnessed something that would challenge the official narrative once again. It began with a handful of reports, a massive, silent object darker than the night sky, outlined by a string of brilliant, pulsating lights. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, so low that witnesses felt they could almost touch it. Then, in an instant, it would accelerate to an impossible speed, vanishing from sight in the blink of an eye. The witnesses were not just farmers. They included a local constable, a pilot, and numerous other professionals, all reporting the same staggering craft. Their collective testimony painted a picture of an immense, structured vehicle, perhaps a mile long, performing maneuvers that defied every known law of physics. The public pressure mounted, forcing the United States Air Force to issue a statement. Their initial response was an absolute denial. They claimed their radar logs showed no unusual activity in the area on those nights, effectively calling the entire town delusional. But the witnesses held firm, and independent investigators pressed for more data. Under this scrutiny, the military story changed dramatically. The Air Force admitted that, in fact, a flight of F-16 fighter jets had been conducting training exercises in a nearby military operating area. This admission was meant to be the final, rational explanation. It was not. The citizens of Stephenville had seen the F-16s. They were familiar with the roar of jet engines and the familiar silhouette of conventional aircraft. What they described was something entirely different, a silent behemoth that dwarfed the fighters. an object that moved with an otherworldly silence and agility the military jets could not hope to match. The official explanation created more questions than it answered. Why did the initial radar logs not show the F-16s if they were really there? How could trained observers mistake a formation of loud, fast-moving jets for a single, silent, mile-wide object that could stop and hover? The Stephenville incident became a classic case of cognitive dissonance, where the official account failed to align with the sheer weight of credible, first-hand experience. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the truth is not hidden in a classified file, but floating in plain sight over a Texas town, witnessed by too many people to simply ignore. The silence of space was about to be shattered by the most compelling military encounter of the modern era. In November of 2004, the United States Navy's most advanced carrier strike group, led by the USS Nimitz, was conducting routine training off the coast of San Diego. For days, the sophisticated radar systems aboard the USS Princeton, a guided missile cruiser within the group, had been tracking anomalous objects. These were not blips or glitches. They appeared as solid returns descending from an extreme altitude of over 80,000 feet, then dropping to hover just above the Pacific Ocean in a matter of seconds, a maneuver impossible for any known aircraft. The objects moved with a purposeful intelligence, pacing the battle group before vanishing from the most advanced sensors on the planet. The stage was set for a direct visual confrontation. Commander David Fravor, a highly experienced F/A-18F Super Hornet pilot, was vectored towards one of these contacts. As he approached the given coordinates, he saw a disturbance on the ocean's surface, a turbulent, churning patch of white water, as if something large was just beneath the waves. Hovering about 50 feet above this frothing oval was a smooth, white, oblong object. It was featureless, with no visible wings, windows, engines, or exhaust plumes, perfectly resembling a giant 40-foot-long Tic Tac breath mint. For a moment, the object seemed to mirror the movements of Commander Fravor's jet, as if it was aware of his presence and was curiously observing him in return. Then it demonstrated its true nature. In an instant, the Tic Tac accelerated with a speed that defied belief. It shot from a stationary hover to a position on the horizon in less than a second, a velocity and acceleration that would have generated gravitational forces capable of turning a human pilot into jelly. It was not just fast, it was teleporting. The object moved as if the laws of inertia and physics simply did not apply to it. Another pilot in the squadron managed to lock the object with his radar for a brief moment, capturing footage that would later become the now declassified FLIR video. The encounter was not a fleeting glimpse. It was a prolonged, multi-sensor event tracked by the most powerful naval radar in the world and witnessed by multiple elite pilots. This was not a weather balloon or a misidentified drone. This was a controlled craft exhibiting a technology that remains to this day, generations beyond our own understanding. The Tic Tac did not just fly, it moved in a way that suggested it had complete mastery over the very fabric of space and time, leaving the world's most powerful navy with nothing but questions and a silent, stunning video. While the Nimitz encounter stunned naval aviators, it was not an isolated event. A decade later, another carrier strike group, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, found itself in a prolonged, unsettling dance with the unknown. Throughout 2015, pilots operating in the East Coast training range repeatedly encountered objects that defied every manual and every expectation. These were not distant lights, but close-range anomalies tracked by the most advanced sensor systems in the world, and this time the evidence was captured on video for all to see. One of the most compelling pieces of footage is known as the gimbal video. In it, a Navy pilot locks onto a small, white object hovering against the wind. His targeting pod shows the craft rotating smoothly, almost serenely, on its own axis. The lack of any visible wings, rotors, or control surfaces is baffling enough, but then the pilots hear something that sends a chill through the cockpit. Their conversation, recorded in real time, reveals their growing disbelief. One pilot exclaims, "Look at that thing," as the object rotates without any regard for atmospheric physics. It turns against the wind, an aerodynamic impossibility for any conventional aircraft. There is no exhaust plume, no heat signature from an engine, nothing but a silent, controlled spin that seems to mock the very laws of nature. The final, awestruck comment from one of the aviators captures the sheer absurdity of the moment. "There is a whole fleet of them," he says, his voice a mixture of professional calm and profound shock. The object they are watching is not alone. Another video released alongside it is called "Go Fast." This clip offers a different but equally impossible perspective. The camera is looking down at the ocean's surface from a high altitude. The sensor locks onto a small, white object zipping just above the waves. The pilots are astonished by its velocity and altitude. It is moving at a tremendous speed, but because of the camera angle and the lack of any reference points, it appears to be hovering. The pilot's audio confirms the bizarre reality. "Look at that thing," one says. "It's going against the wind. The wind is 120 knots to the west. The object is maneuvering at low altitude in conditions that would tear apart any known drone or aircraft, and it is doing so without any visible means of propulsion. There are no wings generating lift, no engine providing thrust, just a small, white Tic Tac moving with an impossible confidence over the open sea." The release of these videos by the United States Department of Defense was a watershed moment. This was not leaked footage from a dubious source. This was official, government-sanctioned evidence captured by the frontline operators of the world's most powerful military, showing technology that operates with a freedom we cannot comprehend. The pilots are not seeing ghosts on their screens. They are tracking solid objects that perform with a silent, effortless grace, leaving behind only a trail of bewildered professionals and a single haunting question. What do you do when your best technology confirms the presence of something your science cannot even begin to explain? For decades, the official government stance was a wall of silence and dismissal. That wall finally crumbled in June of 2021. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report to Congress that fundamentally changed the conversation. Titled "The Preliminary Assessment on Unidentified Aerial Phenomena," this document was a landmark admission. It confirmed that the objects witnessed by Navy pilots and tracked by their advanced systems were not hallucinations or secret American technology. They were real, physical objects in our skies, and they represented a genuine mystery. The report analyzed 144 encounters reported by U.S. government sources between 2004 and 2021. After a thorough review, investigators could only explain one of them with high confidence. That left 143 cases, a vast majority, completely unexplained. These objects demonstrated flight characteristics that defied known physics, including moving without any visible means of propulsion and withstanding extreme G-forces that would tear apart any human-made aircraft. The report explicitly stated that these unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP, clearly posed a flight safety issue and a potential threat to national security. Imagine the implications. For the first time, the United States government was openly stating that our most protected airspace was being penetrated by objects whose origins and intentions were a complete unknown. This was not a fringe theory anymore. It was an official finding. This marked a seismic shift from decades of public denial and Project Blue Book era explanations of weather balloons and swamp gas. The government was now taking the phenomenon seriously, moving toward a posture of transparency and dedicated investigation. The report itself acknowledged the stigma that had long prevented pilots from coming forward, and it called for a standardized, government-wide effort to collect and analyze future data. The UAP Task Force report did not provide the answers we all seek, but it did something just as important. It validated the experiences of every credible witness, every pilot, and every citizen who had ever looked up at a strange light and known deep down that they were seeing something truly extraordinary. The question was no longer if these things were real, but what we were going to do about them. The official acknowledgement of UAPs set the stage for a real-world crisis that would grip the entire nation. In early 2023, a massive, high-altitude Chinese spy balloon traversed the United States, its slow, deliberate path tracked by millions on live television before it was finally shot down by a U.S. Air Force fighter jet off the coast of South Carolina. The military was transparent about this object's origin and purpose, a clear act of surveillance. But then, something far more puzzling happened. In the days that followed, the military detected and subsequently shot down 3 additional objects over Alaska, Canada, and Lake Huron. These were not spy balloons. Officials were quick to state they posed a potential threat to civilian air traffic, but beyond that, they offered no immediate explanation. They were described as cylindrical or octagonal, about the size of a small car, and they flew at altitudes that commercial aircraft use. The most baffling detail was that they appeared to have no visible means of propulsion and no identifiable payload. The official statements were a study in cautious ambiguity. Authorities admitted they had no evidence these objects were engaged in intelligence gathering, and they could not rule out benign origins, perhaps tied to commercial or research entities. Yet they were unable to confirm what or who was operating them. For a few tense days, the conversation shifted from hypothetical UAPs to tangible, physical objects being actively engaged by the world's most powerful military, with no one able to say for certain what they were. The media cycle exploded, pushing the topic of unidentified objects from the fringes back into the center of public discourse. This series of events created a perfect storm of mystery and official concern, forcing a stark question into the open. If these objects were not Chinese spycraft and not simple weather balloons, then what were they doing in our most sensitive airspace, and why was the only solution to blast them out of the sky? Some places seem to attract the strange, and none more so than a remote property in northeastern Utah known as Skinwalker Ranch. This 512-acre parcel of land has become legendary, a melting pot for every conceivable kind of high strangeness. It is not just a site for UFO sightings, but a paranormal disnil, and where the rules of reality appear to bend and break on a regular basis. For decades, the ranch has been the stage for reports of enormous, wolf-like creatures impervious to bullets, strange orbs of light that drift through walls, and invisible forces that have left both animals and humans with a profound sense of dread. The property first gained notoriety in the 1990s when the Sherman family experienced such a relentless onslaught of phenomena that they eventually abandoned their home. Their stories included cattle mutilations, poltergeist activity, and encounters with a being they described as a shapeshifter, a creature that could alter its form at will. The sheer density of bizarre reports soon attracted the attention of billionaire aerospace entrepreneur Robert Bigelow. His National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, purchased the ranch and launched a multi-year, scientifically rigorous investigation. They brought in physicists, biologists, and surveillance experts, all armed with the best equipment money could buy. What they documented was both baffling and physically measurable. Researchers reported instances where invisible objects, detected only by their effect on the environment, would plow through fields, creating deep trenches in the soil overnight. They recorded bizarre energy fluctuations and witnessed portals, or temporary openings in the fabric of space, appear in the sky. On one occasion, a laser beam aimed at a particular point was seemingly bent, as if passing through a lens that was not there. The official scientific investigation did not debunk the activity, it corroborated it while failing to provide any conventional explanation. The ranch's reputation as a hotspot has only intensified under its subsequent owners, who have continued to document a relentless stream of anomalies. It is a place where the phenomenon seems interactive, almost intelligent, responding to the observers in real time and demonstrating a playful, sometimes menacing, awareness. Skinwalker Ranch presents a unique challenge to our understanding. It suggests that the mystery is not always a solitary craft passing in the night, but can be a localized, persistent, and multifaceted intrusion into our world. A place where the veil between what we know and what we cannot explain becomes dangerously thin. These stories of inexplicable lights and impossible machines have long since escaped the confines of military files and witness reports to become a fundamental part of our modern mythology. Each absurd sighting, from the Washington D.C. flap to the Tic Tac over the Pacific, has dripped into the collective consciousness, fueling a cultural revolution. The terror of the unknown felt by Betty and Barney Hill became the narrative blueprint for films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The silent, city-sized craft of the Phoenix Lights echoed in the blockbuster spectacle of Independence Day. Our entertainment has become a mirror, reflecting and amplifying the public's deep-seated fascination and fear, transforming the UFO from a fringe topic into a central pillar of science fiction. This cultural shift has, in turn, created a powerful demand for transparency, forcing the government's hand in ways that would have been unthinkable just 2 decades ago. Out of this new environment, organizations like To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science emerged, founded by former Blink-182 musician Tom DeLonge and staffed by former intelligence officials from the Pentagon. Their mission was audacious: to legitimize the study of these phenomena and force it into the mainstream scientific and political discourse. They were instrumental in the bombshell New York Times article of 2017 that revealed the Pentagon's secret UAP program, shattering decades of official silence and stigma. The conversation was no longer confined to late-night radio. It was happening on the floor of the United States Congress. Today, that pressure for disclosure is building to a historic crescendo. Bipartisan groups of senators and representatives are now pushing for legislation that would declassify all government records related to UAPs, using a model similar to the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act. They argue that the American people have a right to know what their government has been hiding for generations. Hearings now feature senior intelligence officials and decorated Navy pilots testifying under oath, their credibility undeniable, their stories consistent. The very language has changed, evolving from the stigmatized term UFO to the more clinical UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, a subtle but significant shift that reflects a new era of serious inquiry. So why do these stories, no matter how absurd, continue to hold such a powerful grip on our imagination? The answer lies in the fundamental questions they force us to confront. They challenge our understanding of physics and our place in the cosmos. They probe the limits of government authority and the public's right to truth. Whether these objects represent non-human intelligence, a secret human technology, or something even stranger, their persistent presence in our skies demands a re-evaluation of everything we think we know. The journey through these 33 sightings is more than a catalogue of mysteries. It is a testament to an enduring human need to look into the vast, dark unknown and finally get an answer. From the frantic radar screens over Washington, D.C. to the silent Tic Tac dancing with Navy jets, this journey through 33 absurd encounters paints a startling portrait of a mystery that refuses to fade. Time and again, we find the same undeniable threads weaving through the decades. There are the credible witnesses, from police officers to pilots, whose lives and careers were defined by what they saw. There is the physical evidence, from radiation burns and landing gear imprints to government-authenticated photographs and official radar data. And always there is the shadow of official obfuscation, the easy explanations of weather balloons and temperature inversions that crumble under the weight of consistent, detailed testimony. These are not just ghost stories, they are a collective record of something tangible, something that interacts with our world, our technology, and sometimes our very bodies. So where does this leave us after all these years and all these sightings? The evidence, scattered and puzzling as it is, points toward a single, staggering possibility. We are not the sole masters of our sky, or perhaps even our own planet. These encounters, in all their bizarre and varied forms, challenge the very foundation of our understanding. They force us to look up from our small world and ask the biggest question of all. If even a fraction of these stories are true, what does that mean for humanity's lonely place in the cosmos? The conversation is no longer confined to the fringe. It is happening in the halls of Congress and in the cockpits of fighter jets. Now we turn the question to you. What do you believe is happening in our skies? Have you ever seen something you could not explain? Share your own stories and thoughts in the comments below. The next great sighting could be just outside your window. Yet for every compelling story, a healthy dose of skepticism is essential. Our minds are powerful pattern recognition engines, constantly trying to make sense of a chaotic world. This very strength, however, can become a weakness when we gaze into the night sky. The planet Venus, for instance, has been mistaken for a hovering craft countless times. Its brilliant, steady light can appear to chase a car or pulse strangely through layers of atmosphere. Swarms of satellites like the Starlink train can look like a silent armada moving in perfect formation. High-altitude research balloons drifting on the edge of space can mimic the slow, silent glide of a massive object. And let us not forget the most common culprit of all, military testing. Secret aircraft like the stealth fighter or the B-2 bomber were UFOs to anyone who saw them before their existence was publicly acknowledged. Our brains are also wired for pareidolia, the tendency to see familiar shapes in random patterns. We see a face in the moon or a camel in a cloud. It is no great leap, then, for our minds to assemble a cluster of distant lights into a structured craft, to impose a narrative of intelligence onto something that is entirely natural. This is why critical thinking is our most valuable tool. It asks for multiple witnesses, for radar corroboration, for any form of physical evidence beyond a fleeting glimpse. It reminds us that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Yet this rigorous skepticism, when applied honestly, leads us to a fascinating and undeniable conclusion. While the vast majority of sightings can be explained, a small, stubborn percentage, perhaps 5%, resists all conventional explanation. These are the cases we have explored, the ones with multiple credible witnesses, simultaneous radar tracking, and measurable physical effects. These are the stories from police officers, pilots, and military personnel who have nothing to gain and everything to lose by coming forward. This is the core of the genuine mystery. It is not about every light in the sky, but about that tiny, resilient handful of encounters that stand up to the harshest scrutiny, the ones that leave even the most hardened skeptics with more questions than answers. They remind us that the universe is far stranger than we can imagine, and that the final chapter on what flies through our skies has not yet been written.